My parents suddenly appeared and began pounding on the car window. Dad, did someone ask you to do something? What's that supposed to mean? You're always so stubborn. Just be quiet and talk to Steve. The chairman prefers his father, so I'll decline unless otherwise. So they were in cahoots with my in-laws, plotting to oust Ed, my husband, from his position as the next chairman. Then, I noticed my mother holding something like a crowbar. She swung it high and crashed. The window shattered with a loud noise. I was stunned when I heard that Steve's car had fallen off a cliff and a suicide note was found. A week after the car was discovered, an envelope arrived by courier scheduled for that day. I quickly took the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter and a key. Read this without my parents finding out. I knew you would, but I had to write it. This is something I wrote in advance in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive it, just laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not, please, Hannah, take what's stored in this locker and run to my uncle's place immediately. Lucy, my sister-in-law, read it with me, and we exchanged glances. We gathered the essentials and hurried to Steve's uncle Ronald's house to protect ourselves and my children and expose what our parents had done. My name is Hannah McKinley, 34 years old. I used to be just a typical housewife until a week ago. Now, I'm a widow with 2 children. They say my husband, Steve, took his own life. That's the most likely scenario. They told me his car went off a cliff with a suicide note on the dashboard. I can't believe it. Won't believe it because I know it's not true. He had no reason to end his life, not him. Steve and I met at our workplace, a resort hotel in a real estate chain. It was where I always dreamed of working since childhood, mesmerized by its grandeur. When my parents' friend invited us, I chose a college with a strong tourism program and worked part-time at a local hotel. Finally, I landed a job at the resort hotel I had longed for. Known for its rigorous employee training, I almost quit early on, but a senior colleague, amidst many quitting, stood by me. That person was Steve McKinley, who later became my husband after 2 years of dating. We married, but then I discovered the truth. Steve was the nephew of the chairman of the real estate group. He was destined to rise as a top executive within the group, though at that time, he was still undergoing training as a regular employee at the resort hotel. After our marriage, he transitioned from the hotel industry to real estate, frequently visiting his uncle, the chairman. Originating as a local real estate enterprise, the group underwent significant expansion post-1950s. The current chairman, now in the second generation, played a pivotal role in the company's success. His foresight during the economic bubble shielded the family from its worst impacts. Steve steadily advanced into resort development, but uncertainty loomed following the chairman's illness the previous year. With no biological heir, Steve was slated as his successor, a decision that ultimately shortened his life. I struggled to accept the news of Steve's passing when it came from the police. Soon after, my in-laws Marcus and Ivana inundated me with phone calls. Hannah, Steve's in quite a mess now, isn't he? A mess indeed. Is that how they sum up their own son's situation? Hey Hannah, it's going to be tough for you alone from now on, right? Why don't you come stay with us? Yeah. With Steve gone, you'll face financial difficulties, won't you? Their words grated on my nerves, and I snapped. I can't even think about the future right now. Before hanging up, I wondered, what are they even talking about? After all, I had only met these in-laws twice. Once for our engagement, and then at our wedding. They didn't even show up when our children were born. Steve had been avoiding his parents, I remembered. When I asked him about their behavior around the time of our marriage, he had bluntly stated, they're useless, never lifting a finger for themselves. Despite holding nominal positions within McKinley Real Estate Group, Steve's parents were essentially kept at bay to prevent any interference, as Steve had explained. Unlike his capable uncle, everything they touched seemed to go awry. They're sent on pseudo-inspection trips to keep them occupied. Surely you've accompanied them on these trips, exploring different places? I had asked. Steve had chuckled. No, Lucy and I were always left alone in our big house. Lucy, Steve's sister, was married to a man unconnected to the family business, residing in a distant city for his work. Harvey, Steve's brother-in-law, shared an unusual camaraderie with him, making special efforts to visit whenever he was in town. Lucy often remarked, I envy how close those men are. Despite their strained relationship with their parents, the siblings shared a bond that seemed to work for them. Once I married and moved away, I chose not to dwell on them. Lucy remarked casually, but Steve is deeply involved with the group, isn't he? Our parents know they're seen as failures within the company, so they resent Steve's success. Is it the same in your family? Absolutely, I replied. I too had a strained relationship with my parents. It seemed fine when I was younger, being their only daughter. I felt reasonably loved. However, their true nature surfaced during my college years. Drop out of college and come back home. I suddenly received that message in my early 20s, around the mid 2000s. It was because a local dignitary's son took a liking to me when he returned to town. This spoiled rich kid insisted on marrying me, and my parents tried to fulfill his wish for their own gain. We've raised you all this time, so you should be grateful, they reasoned. My image of them crumbled. They hadn't raised me out of love but in expectation of something in return. Realizing this, I firmly refused to return home. They stopped funding my tuition and living expenses, hoping I would yield, but I didn't. It wasn't stubbornness. I sought advice from my professors and found scholarships to cover my tuition. The challenge was my living expenses. I moved into a modest apartment, sold unnecessary belongings, and juggled university, part-time jobs, and job applications. I rarely returned to my room except to sleep. Ironically, these part-time jobs led to my career and meeting Steve. Strangely, my parents were pleased about my marriage to him. Were they good parents then? Steve asked, comparing them to his own with a wry smile. No, I replied. They investigated you thoroughly, discovering you were the nephew of the real estate group's chairman. Steve struggled to accept it initially, but when they visited us after Sam and Maya were born, he realized they were no different from his own parents. Now you have 2 kids, your future is secure, my parents said, and Steve's added, absolutely, our lives will be easier too. At that moment, I noticed Steve's smile falter slightly. Both of us were sensitive to those words spat out by our parents, especially since Steve knew about my college struggles. Were they being too casual, or did they simply take us for granted? Either way, their words unmistakably revealed their intentions to depend on us and our children in the future. From then on, Steve became more cautious of them. Distant in-laws, overly eager parents. While navigating these relationships carefully, I focus on raising our children. Thankfully, Steve's current position and salary allowed us to afford a housekeeper and babysitter. Despite lacking trustworthy relatives, we managed on our own. But things took a turn last year. The chairman fell ill unexpectedly. Despite being in his 60s and known for his fitness, a head injury from his youth had developed into a hematoma, necessitating emergency surgery to relieve brain pressure. Although the operation was successful with no lasting effects, the incident unsettled the group. With no designated successor in place, the chairman had perhaps assumed he could continue indefinitely without deciding on a successor. However, illness strikes unexpectedly, prompting the urgent need to identify a successor. During his recovery, the chairman nominated Steve. This seemed a logical choice to most senior staff members, given Steve's training within the group and executive education. But not everyone accepted it. Steve's parents, please wait, Ronald. He's still young, isn't he? Shouldn't I be your closest confidant? Why choose Steve over me? They confronted the resting chairman with these arguments. In response, the chairman firmly rebuked them. Handing over the group to you would spell disaster. He then outlined his reasons for selecting Steve. This only intensified their hostility towards Steve. They demanded he step down, asserting that he should hand over control to them due to his youth. It was a thinly veiled threat. Initially couched as a request, their tone gradually shifted to one of ultimatum. Do something about this, or else. This is getting dangerous, I murmured. What do you mean? Steve asked sharply. If we let them be, they might harm us or even our kids. I always wondered if they were capable of going that far. They will, Steve asserted. I never considered them my parents, and they probably never saw us as their children. No, it's worse, Steve shook his head. They view children as tools for their own gain. It's the same with my parents. What should we do then? The word take sent a chill down my spine. I had finally found a family filled with love and trust, and I was determined to keep everyone safe. I have an idea. First, we'll ask the building manager to restrict access for suspicious individuals. Hannah, make sure to stay vigilant when you're out with the kids. Can I handle it alone? I'll arrange for my uncle to hire a security company. They'll discreetly watch over you whenever you're out. Got it, I nodded. From then on, I opted for popular spots for outings with the kids whenever possible. I actively joined gatherings with other moms, something I had hesitated about before. It's less likely for someone to try something when my children and I are with a group. But despite these precautions, an attempted abduction happened. It occurred while we were playing in the park, surrounded by other moms. Out of nowhere, a plump, middle-aged woman who appeared to be strolling snatched my daughter and fled. A vigilant security guard intervened swiftly, but the woman, surprisingly agile, managed to escape. We never discovered her identity or motive. It's a scary world out there. Let's all stay cautious, everyone remarked. We agreed to remain vigilant not only against potential kidnappings but also other dangers. However, there was one oversight on my part. Hey there. Unexpectedly, I encountered my parents in the apartment parking lot as I returned from shopping with the kids. In a panic, I hurriedly returned to the car and locked the doors. My parents began banging forcefully on the car windows. Mama, why are Grandma and Grandpa doing this? I'm scared. I cracked the window open slightly, just enough to fit my fingers through, and asked cautiously, "What do you want?" "Ah, you finally opened up. Listen, Hannah, can you talk to Steve? It doesn't seem right for young Steve to become the next chairman. Isn't the order all wrong?" A shiver ran down my spine. Could it be that these people— Dad, did someone put you up to this? What are you talking about? My father pretended ignorance. Then my mom spoke sharply. You're always so stubborn. Just be quiet and convince Steve. Tell him it's better if his own father becomes the chairman, and he should step aside. With a crowbar-like object in her hand, she swung it forcefully. There was a loud crash as the window shattered, causing the children to scream and cry in fear. Reacting swiftly, I shouted to the kids, "Get down," and began honking the horn, hoping to alert nearby security guards. Thankfully, we soon heard the footsteps of several men running towards us. "Curses," my parents muttered, quickly retreating from the scene and jumping into a nearby car to escape. "Are you all right?" the security guards asked us urgently. "I'm fine, but the kids," I started. "We're okay," my son interrupted loudly, though it was clear they had been hit by falling glass shards. "Let's go back to our apartment right away. Can you escort us to the entrance?" The guards agreed and accompanied us safely back. The building manager was shocked at our condition and promised to increase security against any future intrusions. That evening, when Steve returned, I recounted everything to him. To think it was my own parents, perhaps they were manipulated, promised a high position if they supported someone else for chairman. It's entirely possible. Why do our parents have to be like this? This is serious. I'll go to Uncle Ronald's to see if he can hide you and the kids for a while. To Uncle Ronald's? I questioned. Yes, discreetly. I'll also contact Lucy. I want her to stay with you all. But won't that be a burden on Lucy given the circumstances? It's necessary. If they're considering me for successor, they might think the same about Lucy being of the same bloodline. We need to present a united front. Steve immediately called Lucy. I can't believe it. Okay, Steve, I'll come over, Lucy responded. What about Harvey? Steve inquired. He's busy with work, but I'll talk to him. Having siblings at a time like this is invaluable, I reflected. The next day, Lucy arrived promptly. I briefed Harvey on the situation, and he expressed his intention to investigate a few matters before joining us later. Really? Harvey is reliable. Well, of course, he's the man I chose. We chuckled together at that remark. However, the day after our conversation, I received a call from the police. Steve McKinley's car was found at the bottom of a cliff. I couldn't immediately grasp the meaning of their words. What does that mean? He's been taken to the hospital. I struggled to fully comprehend the rest of the conversation. I heard the voice on the other end speaking, but I felt paralyzed. Seeing my reaction, Lucy took over the call for me. From then on, Lucy guided me to various places. We went to the police station to confirm the news and were given an envelope found in the dashboard, a suicide note. As I opened it, there was a printed letter inside. It expressed Steve's inability to bear the burden of being appointed chairman and his remorse over it. Based on this note, the police concluded that my brother had taken his own life. No, there's still an autopsy to be done. You're showing us this because you found it. He wouldn't do this to himself. I protested loudly. How could he, after warning us to be so cautious? I struggled to find more words. The police assured us they would contact us when it was time to retrieve Steve's body. The following days blurred together in my memory. The local news repeatedly mentioned that while the cause of the car's plunge was unclear, a suicide note suggested it was likely intentional. Frustrated, I turned off the TV, and my children looked at me with concern. When is Daddy coming home? My son was 8, and my daughter only 5. Both had been kept out of school and kindergarten for a while. Lucy's presence during this time was a true blessing. My mind felt clouded, everything seeming surreal. A week after Steve's car was discovered, a courier delivered an envelope scheduled for that day. "Hannah, this is for you." Lucy handed it to me. Lost in my thoughts, I glanced at the sender's name, and my eyes widened. Steve. Quickly, I grabbed the envelope and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter and a key. "Read this discreetly. I knew you'd understand," I whispered to myself, sensing Steve's urgency in the words. "This is something I prepared in case of an emergency. If I'm with you when you receive it, just laugh and return it to me. But if I'm not, I implore you, Hannah, take what's stored in this locker and seek refuge at Uncle Ronald's place immediately." Lucy and I exchanged solemn looks as we read through Steve's instructions. Swiftly gathering only the essentials, we hurried the children into Lucy's car. My own car was still in repairs from the earlier incident, leaving me uneasy about driving a loaner vehicle all the way to Ronald's estate. I entrusted Lucy with the task. "I'll handle it, but wear a hat and mask," Lucy advised with a reassuring smile. With nervous anticipation, we embarked on the journey, tense until we reached Ronald's secluded mansion in the neighboring state. Despite being reassured by the presence of security guards, I couldn't shake the fear lingering from Steve's tragedy. We had informed Ronald of our arrival beforehand, and upon reaching, we parked inside the estate and hurried to the main house. Ronald, along with his wife Olivia, awaited us at the grand entrance. "You made it, Hannah." Lucy. "Steve forewarned me to secure your safety and said you'd come here eventually, but I never expected it under these circumstances. Thank you for trusting us. We're sorry for the trouble, but we had no other choice." Gratefully, I nodded, feeling a weight lifted off my shoulders. The children gazed in wonder at their surroundings. "Don't worry, none of us anticipated this. I underestimated the severity of the situation," Ronald reassured us warmly. "I never expected they would go after Steve himself, those people." Clenching his fists in frustration, we were led into a spacious living room. It exuded a warm and peaceful atmosphere. Ronald's wife, Olivia, instructed the housekeeper, who soon brought treats for the kids to a corner of the room. "Thank you." "You're welcome. I imagine you'll want to keep a close eye on them now?" "Yes, I can't bear to let them out of my sight, but what we're about to discuss isn't something I want them to overhear. That man has always been rotten to the core. We wanted to remove him from the group, but lacked definitive evidence. Allowing him to roam freely has led to this. It's not your fault, Uncle Ronald. My parents were involved too. Steve and I, unfortunately, shared the burden of having terrible parents. If only we had taken Steve in as our adopted son sooner," Olivia murmured to herself. Suddenly, Ronald looked up. "That's it. That's a good idea. Call the lawyer, Olivia. I didn't want those kids to suffer the way Steve did." With those words, he made a proposal to me. Eventually, Steve's body, following the autopsy, was brought to Ronald's home for a private funeral and a memorial service within the group. I attended, standing alongside the children. My parents sat behind us, conspicuously part of the family. Colleagues and superiors, bewildered and saddened by Steve's sudden passing, offered their condolences during the service. Steve was truly a remarkable employee. We all had high hopes for his future in the group. "Thank you." Steve would have been deeply touched to hear that, I mechanically replied, exchanging condolences with his colleagues and my own friends who mourned his sudden loss. Everyone who knew Steve personally spoke highly of him, but his parents? After the memorial service, Ronald gathered family members, in-laws, and company executives at his home. The expansive garden and halls were bustling with people. In the midst of this, someone hurried in. It was Harvey, Lucy's husband, clutching a bag tightly as he approached. "Sorry for being late, Lucy." "Hannah, I had some things to take care of. But holding the memorial and the general meeting on the same day worked out. I managed to get everything done." Harvey grinned. "I'm returning these to you," he said, pulling out a set of documents and a memory stick from his bag. "Is everything all right now? Are these the contents from the locker indicated by the key we received the other day after rushing off in Lucy's car?" We met up with Harvey, who made copies of the documents and the memory stick. "You've given the copies to our lawyer, right?" "Yes, they're with our lawyer. We need the originals here." I nodded vigorously. During the general meeting, Ronald spoke openly about the incident, expressing his sorrow over losing Steve, the intended successor. When there was a pause in his speech, Ronald shifted to another matter. This is indeed a tragic situation, and I believe I made an error in one regard. The chairman began. He called me and my two children forward. Understandably nervous in the midst of adults, Sam and Maya looked apprehensive, on the verge of tears. I reassured them quietly, "It's okay. Therefore, I have decided to announce the next successor right here. My new children, Sam and Mia. They are Steve's children, and I have legally adopted them both." A murmur rippled through the gathering at the mention of the children. Many of you may be surprised, but I believe this tragedy occurred because Steve remained merely a nephew, Ronald continued, directing the crowd's attention to himself and Olivia. "What are you saying, Ronald? Should this be discussed here?" "Yes, it should," he affirmed gravely, his words leaving no room for doubt. "And the police haven't disclosed any details about finding a note in the dashboard," Harvey interjected, seeking Ronald's permission to speak. "Go ahead. I trust you." Meanwhile, Marcus stumbled over his words. "If it was found in the car, then that's just how it is, right? We haven't leaked any information to the media. Or perhaps, Marcus, you truly had no interest in what I do." Harvey retrieved his police badge from his suit pocket. He was indeed a lieutenant from the county police department where we resided. Marcus was taken aback. Had he genuinely been unaware? I was genuinely surprised. Lucy had mentioned they hadn't kept in touch much since she started working, and they only recently learned about their marriage. But wouldn't one at least take an interest in their daughter's partner's profession? "That's typical of him," Lucy muttered under her breath. "I can only provide critical evidence in the investigation," Harvey continued. "The police have been investigating Steve's car from the beginning, noticing early on that the brakes had been tampered with. It appears this tampering occurred on the day Steve sent the letter via courier. Steve first went to place something in a locker at the station, then stopped at a convenience store to mail the letter to Hannah. It took some time, during which the brakes were tampered with. Initially, it wasn't immediately dangerous. Later, as Steve drove towards this house, he encountered a road with several winding sections." Whispers spread through the room. "Yes, many can identify with that. He was being relentlessly pursued because of road rage, the driver following him deliberately, as was apparent. The roads in this area aren't always wide. Indeed, narrow roads are a common issue in rural areas," Ronald interjected gravely. His words were cryptic, but their meaning resonated with everyone present. "Yes, and the police have identified the road rage driver from Steve's dashcam footage and have him in custody," Harvey said, nodding towards my in-laws. "But what does this have to do with us? The road rage driver appears to have been hired. The true instigator is still under investigation. However, Marcus, you are already facing charges in a separate case." "A separate case?" "Yes, for embezzlement you've been conducting for years." "Steve had been quietly investigating this," Ronald added, gesturing towards the evidence. Suddenly, projectors around the room illuminated, displaying various incriminating documents on the walls. "We are arresting you for embezzlement at the moment." The doors swung open, and police officers entered the room. Harvey glanced briefly at me, then focused on my parents. "You there." My parents started to rise from their seats. "You were under arrest for destroying Hannah's car." "What? This is a family matter." My mother protested. I confronted her sharply. A parent who smashes a car window with a crowbar, unconcerned about the glass falling on their grandchildren. Staring at them with intensity, I spoke with all the strength I could muster. "You were no parents to me at all." Stunned, my parents sank back into their seats. Subsequently, my in-laws were arrested for embezzlement and confessed during interrogation to plotting Steve's demise, further complicating their legal troubles. My parents faced charges of property damage and aiding my in-laws' criminal activities. The case initially made local headlines, featuring prominently in regional newspapers and news broadcasts. However, its sensational nature and involvement of actual parents ensured it became national news, captivating talk shows and social media. In today's digital age, their reputations were irreparably tarnished, their names forever associated with stigma online. Even if they were eventually released, their future prospects seemed grim. But that was no longer my concern. Since then, we have been living in Ronald's house where we have our own rooms. Olivia doted on Sam and Mia, Perhaps overly so, having always yearned for children but unable to conceive. For now, I believed it was beneficial. Sam and Mia, having recently lost their father, underwent changes in schools and kindergarten. I regretted involving them in adult conflicts, but for their safety it seemed the best course. Meanwhile, Ronald remained committed to maintaining his health, ensuring he could support Sam and Maya until they reached adulthood, focusing on his physical well-being daily. Tea is ready, everyone. I spent my days here, caring for my children and being a support to Ronald and Olivia. I didn't know how much of a difference I made to them, but for the children's sake, I intended to live life to the fullest.